and our dear friend Scott Ritter is here with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Please subscribe and hit like button, helping us reaching more people. Recently, our audience they don't get the notification from YouTube. I don't know what's the issue, but they're doing this every time. Scott, you are on. They don't send the notification to the audience. And let me start, Scott, with what's going on in Europe. I'm sure that you know about the case of Colonel Jacques, and they're putting sanctions on him because they don't like what he's talking about when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine. They want to silence him. And we know, you remember JD Vance going to Europe saying that Europe is turning into a dictatorship. And these people are not, pro-Russians. They're anti-war. They don't want war. They don't see any benefit coming out of the war in Ukraine for Europe, for any European countries. What is your take, and particularly on the case of, Colonel Jacques?
It's authoritarianism in the extreme form. It's the antithesis of democracy. I mean, the European Union is, running around lauding itself as, the last bastion of democracy, saying they're even better than the United States, and they have free speech. They have freedoms. It's the exact opposite. These are oppressive societies that suppress free speech across the board. These are, the European Union is this artificial construct that is the antithesis of sovereignty. It seeks to, bring to life a Frankenstein monster of, an amalgam of European nations and cultures that stand for nothing except oppression, because they don't have any fundamental values. They're there to empower. I mean, literally, the European Union exists to empower entitled political and economic elites. It was created by them, for them, on their behalf. That's it. They're not here to promote any values. They're not here to help, populations. They're there to enrich themselves and their supporters. And, the Ukraine war has become a vehicle of sustainment for these political and economic elites. And anybody who dares put forward a narrative, especially a fact-based narrative, drawn from European facts as opposed to Russian facts, as Jacques Baud has done. He simply uses the truth as recognized by the Europeans. There's not a single fact in his writing that is under dispute. It's just the way he connects the dots, exposes the lies and the hypocrisy of the European elite. And so they silenced him. Look, I was invited to go to Europe in March to promote my new book, which is being published in several European languages. I'm not going because, frankly speaking, they'll arrest me. And I just don't want to go through that harassment. I'm not afraid of these people, but my daughter's giving birth to a baby. I want to be home for them instead of fighting some stupid legal case in a European court. Europe is a place that can't be visited right now. If you're an American, don't visit Europe because they don't believe in free speech. They don't have American values. They are the opposite of that. And right now they're turning on America. I mean, they are actively conspiring in a way that hurts the national security of the United States. Europe is the enemy. Donald Trump was right to point this out in his national security strategy. I mean, Europe is headed towards civilization erasure because there is no European civilization anymore. The European Union is not civilization. It's a dictatorship by any other name. They are working against our interests. They are promoting war. They are, breaking the law and reinventing the law, trying to steal sovereign wealth from Russia. There's no legal justification for anything they're doing. They just say it's good for Europe, and therefore they come up with different variations of a theme. Taxation without representation, just again promoting everything they claim not to stand for is what they're promoting. I can't go to Europe. I think you would have trouble going to Europe after some of the things that you platform me. So you're automatically guilty. You're going to go to hell. Um, and it's just ridiculous. It's a parody. I mean, it's bad. They're so stupid that they think that we don't know history. They're reinventing the Second World War right now, pretending Russia simply didn't play a role in the defeat of Nazi Germany. I mean, Kelly Kalas is just a colossal embarrassment to humanity. I mean, she's just beyond it. The stupidity of her statements are beyond belief. You got Sikorsky, the Polish foreign minister, who wants to pretend that Poland is the friend of Ukraine. Study your damn history. I have. I know it better than you, apparently. You know, I know that, for instance, Poland suppressed Western Ukrainian independence in the Polish-Ukrainian conflict from 1918 to 1919, and then during the Polish-Soviet conflict from 1919 to 1921, you destroyed Ukrainian independence. Poland hates Ukraine. Study the history of Poland. You know, I'm not going to justify what the Ukrainians did in Volhynia in 1943. That cannot be justified. But understand, there was deep resentment from the Ukrainian population about the arrogance and the elitism of the Poles, who treated the Ukrainians like utter crap, because Poland never believed in Ukraine, doesn't believe in Ukraine today. They just have been hijacked by these globalists, these European elites who buy into this fake notion of I think when it's all said and done, they start parsing through. Once the European Union collapses and the records are opened, you're going to find that the European Union as a construct was one of the most fundamentally corrupt institutions on the planet, because there is no checks and balances. They literally are a law unto themselves, and the people that are empowered by them politically do things. They're starting to look at the former foreign minister. I forget her. It begins with an M, Margarita or more. She's under investigation. Wait till Ursula von der Leyen, they open the books on her and see what she did and what they all do. We mock Ukraine for being the most corrupt place on earth, but corruption begets corruption, and the European Union is extraordinarily corrupt too. So this is a travesty. I mean, it's actually good that we see the truth about the European Union. So there's no nostalgia over Europe. This isn't your grandfather's Europe. This is a new Europe, a sick Europe, a diseased Europe, and a Europe that's fundamentally anti-American. And as an American, and I know there's people out there, Scott, America, you're a hypocrite. Hey, screw you. I don't care about you guys. What I care about is what's happening right now. I understand my history better than you do. Remember who stood up against the Iraq War, who called out the United States as, the perpetrator of an illegal war of aggression, who's standing up the United States today, accusing them of preparing to carry out a similar illegal war of aggression in Venezuela. So pound sand. I know my history and I know my role as a citizen, but I also know that my government is making an effort to undo the sins of the past by promoting peace with Russia. That's why we promulgated a national security strategy that doesn't define Russia as an enemy or adversary, but rather as an ally of stability, a force of stability, a partner for stability. Pretty amazing stuff. The two largest nuclear armed nations in the world, instead of posturing off against each other for potential nuclear annihilation, talking about normalization of relations, something everybody should want, except apparently the Europeans, who are pushing us towards nuclear Armageddon. And I take umbrage at that. So no, Europe is the enemy. Russia is the friend. And what they're doing to Jacques Baud is a travesty.
When you talk about Europe, do you draw a line between the people in Europe and the leadership in Europe, or you see that the public opinion somehow was wrapped up in a, somehow in some sort of thick propaganda? That's why the public opinion is not that much critical of the leadership in Europe.
It's tough. Look, I know for a fact that there's Europeans right now who disagree with the policies of the European Union. There's Germans who disagree with the policies of what Germany's doing. There's French people who disagree with the policies of Macron, British who disagree with the policies of Starmer. I know that there's good people in Europe. So you don't want to paint everybody with a broad brush. But if you're German, understand this. You are an enemy state. I'm not making it up. It's in the United Nations Charter, Article 53, Article 107. Oh, Scott, it's outdated. No, it's not. It's still the law. They haven't amended the charter. Well, in 1995, they passed a resolution by the General Assembly saying that it was moot, that these are good countries now. That was then. This is now. Nations change. And what we're seeing is Germany and Japan going back to the aggressive policies of the past. I mean, Germany literally could be taking pages out of Mein Kampf, Mertz, and reading them, just changing, updating it. It's the same thing. Militarization, Dragna Osten. I want to remind people about Ostplan, Plan Ost, the systemic slaughtering of the Slavs. And listen to the way Mertz talks about the Russians, the dehumanization of the Russians. So if you're German, understand this. You don't get a free pass at all. You have committed horrific sins in the course of the past century. Twice in a century and a half, you've taken the world to global conflict, killings hundreds of millions of people. And now you're getting ready to do it again. I'm sorry. I guess there are good Germans, but no. If you're a German right now and you understand your history, understanding the whitewashing of the Nazis that took place in the aftermath of the Second World War, understanding that Nazi war criminals were given a free pass by the United States, by the British, to be reabsorbed for the purpose of confronting the Soviet Union. I mean, you go to Plan Unthinkable, Winston Churchill's plan, crafted in the summer of 1945. Was going to bring 10 Nazi divisions back into active strength to join the American and British to launch an attack against the Soviets. We just put the stake through the heart of the Nazi beast, and we are literally talking about rehabilitating 10 divisions of Nazis. And after Nuremberg, we basically stopped prosecuting the generals, and we whitewashed them. We went through a whole process of just making them smell good, letting them rewrite their history. All the interesting German books that came out about, warfare during the Battle of Normandy and the fighting, the tank wars in Eastern Europe, ignoring the fact of the horrific crimes that the same generals who wrote these books committed against the populations of these occupied nations. Why did we whitewash them? Because we needed the Germans to stand up against the Russians. We needed to be able to recreate a German army. We didn't call it the Wehrmacht, we called it the Bundeswehr. German industry, all of these industrialists who should have been put up against the wall and shot, were allowed to live and thrive without punishment. And today they're the heart of the remilitarization of Germany. Germany, cleanse thyself and recognize that the sins of the past survive to haunt you today. And I would say this about all of Europe. All of Europe has to take a long, hard look because, gosh, the last time I checked, almost all of Europe was occupied by the Nazis, and every single one of these occupied states had collaborators who caved into the Nazis. And I would say that the European Union, the non-German members of the European Union, are collaborators with the resurrection of the Third Reich, called the Fourth Reich today. I'm not exaggerating, people. Read the frickin' statements. Scott, you're mad. Yeah, I'm angry. And you should be too. Everybody should be angry. Furious that we've forgotten everything we claimed we stood for. The United Nations was supposed to be about preventing the very conflicts that Europe is talking about promoting. Scott, Russia invaded Ukraine. Again, you show your ignorance. Russia didn't invade Ukraine. Ukraine invaded itself, threatening the Russian-speaking population. And from 2014 till 2022, Russia bent over backwards, literally. They could have slaughtered the Ukrainian army in 2015, surrounded into Bolshevik. But Putin didn't want to do that. Putin didn't want to take Ukrainian territory. Putin said that these areas should be part of Ukraine, but the Ukrainians need to respect the legitimate rights of the Russian-speaking population. Germany and France and the president of Ukraine said, okay, spare the lives of our soldiers and we'll do all this. But now they admit it was a sham. They lied. Do you guys forget the lies that were told by the Germans, by Angela Merkel, by Francois Hollande, by Petro Poroshenko, saying, no, we will do this Minsk thing, but secretly saying, no, we're just buying time. We're never going to do it. And what were they buying time for? To rebuild the Ukrainian army to NATO standards, to be part of an expansive NATO presence that sought the strategic defeat of Russia, the collapse of Russia, the division of Russia. I mean, Kale Kalas is at least honest enough to say what her goals are, to break Russia up. It's always been the goal of these European elitists. And you sit there and say, well, the Russians are to blame. Guys, you're lucky the Russians are patient, because if Russia was the United States, we'd have already taken Europe off the map, because Europe deserves to be taken off the map for the things that they're doing. So, yeah, I'm a little angry, and I blame the European population. Guys, revolution. Okay? Revolution or be found guilty. There's no room for the good German of the 1930s and 40s. You know, the ones that simply went to work and did their job and paid their taxes, and they didn't get involved politically. They just, grew the food that was used to feed the Nazi military. They went to jobs to produce the equipment that sustained the Nazi military. All you European citizens today that go to work, earn a paycheck, and pay taxes, you're sustaining this. Why don't you take a lead from the farmers at least? Go out in the damn streets, spread shit all over the buildings of the French political elite, and just say you're not going to put up with it anymore. That's what a good European would do. But you're not doing that, are you?
Is Europe preparing to fight Russia in the aftermath in 2029, 2030? Here is, before going to the question, that my question, here is what the UK Chief of Defense said, Scott. Yeah. What are they cooking for the conflict in Ukraine? Do you see escalation, and how capable is the United Kingdom, for example, to go in that direction?
Well, they're led by this gentleman who has nothing but Jubilee medals on his chest. Okay, he's never seen combat, doesn't know what combat is. I don't think he's deployed outside of the United Kingdom. He's been a rear echelon something forever. And yet he's sitting there talking the language of war. He has about as much credibility as my pinky. My pinky's been to more war than he has. So no. Understand that his presentation came simultaneously with the presentation of Blaise. The last name begins with an M, Georgian derivation. Grandfather was a horrible Nazi war criminal, Ukrainian, who committed horrific crimes, probably died, hopefully screaming and suffering in 1944 when the Russians carried out their counterattack, pushing the Nazi forces out of what's left of Belarus. But we don't know. Hopefully he's dead. Probably dead. Hopefully he died then. But, she survived. She claims she never knew him, but all that. But when you deal with the Ukrainian diaspora like I have, and you understand they never forget their past, and they celebrate their past. But, Blaise gave a presentation too the same day. Ask yourself, why is the defense chief and the intelligence chief, who are implementers of policy, they don't make policy. They don't make policy. So why are they out there making policy, suggesting policy? It's an information operation. Okay, the United Kingdom can't go to war against Russia. Literally, they can't. They've got nothing, zero. And Blaise runs an organization that does hybrid warfare. I mean, the hypocrisy of this woman, knowing what the British are doing today in Ukraine, knowing how the British have empowered the Ukrainian special forces and intelligence service to carry out acts of terrorism against Russia, and indeed now the world. The drone attack that took place in the Mediterranean, the British did that. The drone attacks that are taking place in the Black Sea, the British are doing that. The Russians know that. Operation Paperclip, or whatever the hell they called that, not a paperclip, the drone operation that took place in Ukraine in June, where they had trucks launch drones. British conceived operations sustained by the British. So she's sitting there saying the Russians are doing hybrid war. No, Blaise, you're doing hybrid warfare. But why are they talking? Because this is an information operation. This is about creating perceptions. And what are they trying to achieve? And again, I say this as an American who's fully aware of what the British are trying to do. They are desperate to stop Donald Trump from implementing his national security strategy. They are doing their best to keep Ukraine in the fight. They need Ukraine to be sustainable. And viable through the midterm elections. They're trying to wait out Donald Trump, and they're actively putting their thumb on the scale of American domestic politics. I mean, we sit there and go, oh, the Russians did this, the Russians did. The Russians didn't do anything, we now know. But the British do. The Europeans are, as we speak. They're in here in the United States doling out money. They're in here buying political allies. And the goal is to generate enough opposition to Donald Trump so that his plans get stymied by a Democratic Congress who will then once again repeat what happened the last term, seeking to impeach, paralyze Trump. That's what's happening here. The British aren't going to war with Russia because the British can't go to war with Russia. NATO can't. NATO is dissolving as we speak. Literally, it's breaking apart. It's fundamentally broken. They will never resurrect this beast. It will not be Lazarus, raised from the dead with the magic touch of Mark Rutte. NATO's finished. They're not trying to save NATO. They're using the perception of a resurrected NATO to create political momentum to get them through the summer of 2026, through the silly season of American politics, in hopes that they can perform a miracle and end up, paralyzing Donald Trump politically by empowering the Democrats to take control of at least, one house of Congress. That's what's happening here.
I think the whole plan right now for Europeans is to outlast, the Trump administration. They know that with the Trump administration, they cannot achieve what they have in their mind in terms of the continuation of the conflict. That was somehow, that was said by Zelensky yesterday. Here is what he said, Scott. These words are not Zelensky's. I think
no, they're British words. They're written by MI6. They're written by Blaze. We know who writes these words. He just threatened the American president. If I were the president of the United States, he'd be a dead man by now. I would have killed him. You don't get to threaten the president of the United States, not that little punk ass dude. No. But hopefully Trump is doing the right thing. And the right thing is to destroy this pathetic excuse of a human being, eliminate his corrupt regime, and get Ukraine on the track of never being able again to promote this kind of disarray globally, because Ukraine is the single most destabilizing force in the world today, even more so than Israel, because Ukraine is doing its best to create the conditions that could lead to a nuclear war. They're disruptive of arms control. They're disruptive of European security and stability. They're disruptive of global economics. I mean, because of Ukraine, the European Union is threatening to, unravel the entire system that's used to sustain trade amongst nations. For what? This pathetic little country of Western Ukrainian, governed by Western Ukrainian nationalists who exist only to kill people who aren't Western Ukrainian nationalists. Go back and read the statements made by Stepan Bandera in a Polish court after he was arrested and tried for the murder of a Polish prosecutor, when he talked about the willingness to commit millions of murders if it gives them a Western Ukrainian state. I mean, this is, extreme nationalism, and it exists today. Listen to what the Ukrainian nationalists are saying about, continuing this war, what they're willing to do. Look at how prevalent they're becoming now. This war has brought about a lot of radicalism. And we saw Azov go from a battalion to a regiment, to a brigade, to a corps, and to several corps now. I mean, they're literally about 1/3 of the Ukrainian military. The most loyal, fanatic fighters are located in these Nazi units that have become the heart and soul of the Ukrainian military. And people need to understand that when the Ukrainians lose, and they will lose, and when the Ukrainian military collapses, and they will collapse, Zelensky has hinted on this. There will be a civil war in Ukraine because these Nazis will not allow themselves to be disarmed. So there will be a civil war. That's where we're at today.
I don't know if you saw the report in a Chinese portal Sohu. They reported that in case of in the event of an attack on Kaliningrad, nothing will remain of Europe. They're talking about 34 million people will die in 5 hours. Do you think that the things that can get that crazy, somehow
Who's that crazy? Who's that crazy?
no, no, this is a report on the Chinese portal.
No,
So
what I'm saying is, do I think who's that crazy?
I'm talking about Europeans, basically German and the United Kingdom.
They need to
Because
understand they will cease to exist. I just did an interview. I don't want to give it away too much because I want people to watch it with Sergei Karaganov. He's a very noted Russian thinker, very influential. He wrote a paper a couple of years ago where he postulated the notion that the United States would not trade Boston for Poznan. And what he's saying is that Russia needs to preemptively hit Europe with nuclear weapons because he doesn't believe the United States will sacrifice America for this crazy Europe. Now, he made that back when Biden was president. He made that statement. Today we have Trump, and it's clear. Understand, Scott Bessent has told the Europeans that if Russia attacks a European country, the Article 5 response from the United States will be to sell NATO weapons, but not to get involved militarily. All right. And now we have a situation where Europe is deliberately provoking Russia in contravention of the policy direction desired by the President of the United States. So now, if NATO attacks Kaliningrad, the Russians will immediately annihilate Europe. 34 million dead, if you're lucky, could be more. And there won't be a damn thing the United States will do about it because we're not going to sacrifice 150 million Americans for the stupidity of Europe. And people need to stop blaming Russia for this. Russia's the one that actually, they're the only ones out there with an arms control plan. They want to extend New START. The United States isn't responding to that. Russia is willing to sit down and talk about any aspect of anything as long as it's done within a framework that respects the legitimate national security interests of Russia. So people have to start asking us, what are you willing to die for if you're European right now? Because if you allow the insanity of the Poles, of the Balts, of the Germans to manifest itself, because remember, Germany has a brigade right now in Lithuania. It's a joke of a brigade. It can't do anything. But my God, we have German tanks in Lithuania posturing to fight the Russians. Is this 1943 all over again? Yes, it is. But you had General Donahue talk about, well, we can shut out the lights in Kaliningrad. No, we can't. General Donahue, no, you can't. First of all, I've said this. I said it at the time. I'll say it again. General Donahue, if he's the commander of NATO forces, will be dead within an hour of NATO forces striking Kaliningrad, because the Russians will just simply take out his command and control facility with a nuclear weapon, and he'll be dead. And so will all the nuclear planners. And then shortly thereafter, the political leadership of Europe will be annihilated as well, as Russia will immediately destroy Europe. Not a single major European city will be left standing. Why? Because Europe poses a threat to Russia, an existential threat. And you don't let rabid dogs run free in your cities. I've said this all along. Russia will become the modern day equivalent of Atticus Finch. And they will pull out the rifle reluctantly, and they will put a bullet through the skull of the rabid dog that is Europe today. I mean, this is harsh talk, but my God, this is what we're talking about. This isn't a joke anymore. This isn't, posturing. Russia's not weak. I mean, Seymour Hersh is a very good friend of mine. I love the man to death, and I have the highest respect for him as a journalist. But he has allowed himself to be hijacked by U.S. sources that just promulgate bullshit, straight up crap. And he's written an article now that, he does say that in the opinion of U.S. sources. But why give them a platform? Because the impression is that you agree with them. And these sources are the Russian army is in disarray. No, not even close. The Russian army is a fully functioning war machine that has, mastered the art of modern day high intensity conflict. I mean, can you point to, a problem here, a problem there? Of course you can. When you have 710,000 soldiers on the line carrying out, intensive combat, there will be people who don't perform well. There will be people who decide they don't want to be there. There will be this, that, and the other thing. But hell, that happens everywhere. I mean, do we judge the United States military because in 1944 we had American soldiers drop their weapons and desert the battlefield? Does that show that there is a systemic problem in the American military, or is the American military one of the finest fighting forces ever, formed at that time, and went on to, defeat Nazi Germany on the Western Front? The Russians right now are pretty damn good at what they do. They're very good at what they do. A military in disarray. What about the Rubicon Center? This is the drone warfare unit that the Ministry of Defense has created, an elite force that even the Ukrainians are like, we can't touch these guys. They're created to kill Ukrainian drone operators. When Rubicon shows up, the Ukrainians know they're about to die, because that's what happens. The supremacy of drone warfare. This is what, Pete Hegseth and, Army Secretary Driscoll, say they want the Americans to be, but the Americans aren't even anywhere close to this. We can't even touch what the Russians are doing right now. Then the Russians have consolidated a drone fighting force into an unmanned, vehicle group. It's a new service. The Ukrainians did it. Ukrainians are pretty damn good too. I mean, in some cases, they're probably better in certain tactical applications, but the Russians have caught up and surpassed them, and strategically, the Russians are dominating this. A military in disarray doesn't do that. The Russians have the ability, they're the quickest turnaround in terms of learning the lessons of war. The Russians are rotating their troops out of the front line on a regular basis. That means that the troops are well rested, and when they rotate out, in addition to resting, and re-equipping, they get retrained based upon the most recent doctrinal lessons that are gathered from the battlefield, taken to the Russian general staff academies and their other fighting academies, where they train, they come up with doctrine, they update it, bring it back down to the training centers. So you could have done an assault on Pokrovsk, captured the town. The lessons that you learned from that battle are taken up to the General Staff Academy while you're rotated out to get rest and re-equipped. And before you come back in, there will be a training academy that trains you on adapting the lessons that you learned. And then you go back in and you fight. Nobody in the world can do that. That's not a military in disarray. That's a military that knows what the hell they're doing. And they're pretty damn good. They're not exhausted. Would they like the war to end? Who wouldn't want the war to end? Everybody wants this war to end. But the Russians will not accept the war ending without victory. And victory is defined by, the Russian leadership, who has the full support of the Russian people. Is the Russian economy suffering? Did you watch Vladimir Putin's, 3+ hour question and answer this morning? How many of those questions were about the economy? A whole bunch of them. And was this an economy that's thriving, or are people calling up saying, hey, there's problems here? There's a taxation burden. There's shortages of fish. You're going through it. Is the Russian government hiding any of this? No. They actually created a forum for the entire world to watch, where Russia's economic problems are put out there, where they discussed everything, to include the Russian central bank and the role that it plays in handling inflation. And Vladimir Putin is sitting here saying, we have problems. We're adjusting to this. We have to make adjustments here. We have to do that. That's a deficiency here. We're working on this here. He's not trying to fake people out. But what you're seeing is a nation that is functioning at every level. Functioning. There are problems. Who wouldn't have problems? 20 tranches of sanctions put on Russia from Europe, the seizure of $240 billion of their national assets, the United States sanctioning energy, disrupting, how they derive income. Who wouldn't have issues? But Russia, I've been there, and I'd recommend you go there too, and not talk to people in Washington, D.C. who have never been there. It's not a failing society. It's a thriving society. They have some issues, but they are thriving because these are Russian patriots. There is no seething under mass of, disenchanted Russians praying for the demise of Putin. Gilbert Doctorow just, he's just wrong, fundamentally wrong on this. And there's no one that shares his opinion except these U.S. officials who are so disconnected from reality, it's not even funny. But no, Russia's not in disarray. The military is not in disarray. The economy is functioning. As Vladimir Putin said, people like to point out, certain statistics about inflation rates, but inflation's dropping. I love one. There was an article that just recently came out about the life expectancy of the average Russian male is 68. That's not good. Could be better. It was 57 in 1998. 57. And now it's 68 while Russia's in a war where they're losing some men. 68. How did you go from 57 to 68? That means a lot of really good things are happening in Russia. Good things that are making life, that's reversing a trend. You don't reverse, life expectancy overnight. It takes time to change the societal ills that created this to begin with. Vladimir Putin has done that. And Russia today is a nation on the right trajectory. Mortgage rates, they're talking, 20% for mortgage rates. Yeah, gosh, I remember in 1980, 81, American mortgage rates were close to 20% as well. Was our society about to collapse? No, economic trouble. But they don't mention that most of the people that need to buy homes right now get the preferential 6% mortgage rate. So yeah, there's a high mortgage rate out there. But for the people that really need the houses, they get 6% mortgage rates. So again, people just don't know Russia. They don't understand the Russian economy. They don't understand the Russian reality. They cherry pick data. I love the one, a certain percentage of Russians don't have, functioning, plumbing. Yeah, because they live in the freaking far north. You know what happens to plumbing in the far north? Outdoor plumbing? It freezes. Pipes blow up. So that's why they don't have the things they've adjusted to that. It's Russian reality, guys. But you go to Moscow, everybody's got a flushing toilet. It's a modern place. You go to any modern Russian city, I've been there. Gilbert, I don't know. I guess he goes to St. Petersburg, Moscow, but maybe Gilbert should get out to the real Russia and see it before he opens his mouth. And maybe U.S. officials should do the same. Get the U.S. embassy people to leave their embassy building in Moscow and travel around Russia and get a true survey of the reality of Russia. Because the reality of Russia is far different than what's being portrayed in the Western media, what's being portrayed by Seymour Hersh, who parrots, U.S. sources who don't know anything about Russia. The Russian Vladimir Putin. The idea. I love this one. He put out the 6 points that the Russians are apparently conceded to Driscoll, who now is a rock star. He's the Army Secretary of the Secretary of Army. He's 36 years old, doesn't know squat. He was a first lieutenant, has limited combat experience, but now he's the Secretary of the Army. Oh, by the way, in addition to being the Secretary of the Army, he's also the head of the Bureau of ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Now, I haven't quite figured out how that one works yet, and what it does on his workload. But apparently, this guy's a rock star who is suddenly taking over the Ukraine thing, and he's worked miracles. My God, he went to Abu Dhabi where he met with the Russians. You know the truth about what happened there? Budanov and the head of the GRU were meeting in Abu Dhabi to talk about exchanging dead bodies, because that's what they do. And Driscoll showed up unannounced and tried to sit on it and tried to have conversations with the Russians that they weren't authorized to have with him. And from this, suddenly we're being told that the Russians aren't going to accept a Ukrainian army of 600,000. Well, I don't know. I listened to Vladimir Putin yesterday and this morning. Did you? There won't be a Ukrainian army that size. The Russians won't agree to it. The Ukrainian army was 260,000 strong when this war began. And that was a NATO-trained army that Russia said ain't going to be allowed to survive. Today, they have 800,000 NATO-trained soldiers today? You think Russia's going to let that? No, the Ukrainian army would be 50 to 60,000, non-NATO affiliated, non-NATO trained. But according to Seymour Hersh's U.S. sources, This is the reality that Putin is going to allow this to happen because he's lost control of the war. His generals are against him. His generals aren't against him. Who the hell came up with this stupidity? The Russian population is turned on. He won the election last year with the largest mandate of any elected Russian official, and it was a legitimate election. In wartime, he swept it. The Russian people said, "You're the man. You're the guy we trust. You're the one we want to lead us out of this mess." Are there problems in Russia? You're damn right there's problems in Russia. There's always been problems in Russia. He inherited a basket case. And for 25 years, he's been working really hard to fix it. But he's been stabbed in the back every step of the way by the West that doesn't want him to succeed. Why do you think he went to Munich in 2007? Because the West loves Russia, was doing it. Why do you think there was a war in Chechnya? Because the CIA was working with the Chechens to create unrest, to break Russia apart. So this entire time that Putin's been in charge, he has been carrying the burden of a collective West that sought his demise, that sought to bring him down. Navalny was a CIA and British asset. There's a videotape of Navalny's deputy saying, "I need $10 million to undermine Russian democracy." Or you guys don't want to remember that, do you? You don't want to know anything about the reality of Navalny. 100% CIA-controlled goon. They're not a representative democracy, none of that. This was the conspiracy of the West to attack democracy. And then when Russia adjusted to survive, to say, look how undemocratic Russia is. Guys, it's just wrong. All of it's wrong. Joe Biden traveled to Moscow in 2011 and met with the Russian opposition in Moscow during an election year and said that Vladimir Putin, it would be bad for Vladimir Putin to run for president again. Could you imagine Dmitry Medvedev coming to the United States and saying, no, it would be really bad for J.D. Vance to run for president 2028. The Americans would go, well, gee, thanks for coming and telling us this. Or would we run them out, tar and feather and run them out of the country for interfering? Joe Biden went there and said that to them. How do you think the Russians respond to that? How do you think they respond to Hillary Clinton, saying what she said about the elections, undermining the confidence of the Russian people in the parliamentarian elections that took place in December of 2011 in the lead up to the president election of 2012 that brought Vladimir Putin back into power. Am I saying that Russia's a perfect democracy? No. Even the Russians don't say it's a perfect democracy. The Russians say it's a Russian democracy. It's a Russian democracy largely shaped by the interference of the United States. 1994, Mr. Mary, who is the charge d'affaires, head of political affairs in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, wrote a long memorandum, the new long memo, long telegram. And he basically chastised the United States for destroying Russian democratic institutions because we wanted to keep, Boris Yeltsin in power. So we prevented Russia from becoming a democracy at the very time they could have become a democracy. But we allowed Boris Yeltsin to suppress. How did he suppress God? He put freaking tanks in the road in October of 1993 and fired on the Russian parliament. He sent troops into the parliament to kill Russian democratic leaders who disagreed with his policies. And then we helped him cook the new election to re-elect a new parliament. I mean, we have destroyed every institution in Russia, economically, politically, everything. We created a basket case on purpose. And Vladimir Putin raised them out of this, and he did so, and the Russian people love him for this. Yeah, was there a majority or a minority of Russians who believed in all the lies of the West? Yeah. And guess what happened after the special military operation began? 900,000 of them left, fled, because they didn't want to be part of Vladimir Putin's Russia. Where'd they flee to? Europe, the United States. And what's happening now? The vast majority of them have already returned to Russia, saying, we made a mistake. We want back. We want to be part of that. We don't want to be part of this. The other ones are getting ready to get kicked out and trampled on. These cowards, or they'll just sell their souls to, Mikhail Khodorkovsky in his little MI6 run institution in London, or, hang out with Gary Kasparov and that crowd, undermining Russian democracy. But the West, we fool ourselves. We believe the stupidity of our own propagandists. The reality of what we've been doing to Russia for the past 50 years, 60 years, should sicken everybody, because we have not been trying to help Russia. And here's the irony of it. The damn Russians still extend a hand of friendship. The Russians still say, okay, but can't we just get along? Can we find a way to get along? My God, if it weren't for the patience and just the basic humanity of Russia, we'd be at war today. Because if this was the United States being treated the way Russia is being treated, we'd have taken these nations off the face of the earth. We would never tolerate it. Europe would never tolerate it. Russia has tolerated it and thrived in the process. I mean, could you imagine how amazing Russia would be today if we hadn't done all the things we did to them? If we just allowed Russia to be Russia on its own volition, not sanctioning their economy, letting their economy function the way it should function, letting Russian democracy evolve the way it should evolve. Could you imagine what Russia would be like today? There's a hell of a lot of corruption in Russia today. A hell of a lot of corruption. I'm not picking on the Russians. They acknowledge it. You just read the newspapers. They arrest this general. They arrest this governor, this lieutenant governor. There's corruption in Russia today. Why? Because Russia was an inherently corrupt state because of what we did to it in the 1990s. And when Vladimir Putin came into president, you can't just clean house overnight. You have to deal with the reality you have. The reality he had was an inherently corrupt Russia dominated by these thieving, scheming oligarchs, the scum of the earth. Nothing good about any of these oligarchs. They stole money, and they stole money in a way, just so people understand, they deliberately stole money from the pensioners, the retired Russians who won the Second World War. There's a great untold story. When I say great, I mean great in terms of the size of it, not in terms of, how good it is. It's a horrible story about what happened to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of these pensioners, the men and women who saved Russia, who saved the Soviet Union through their sacrifice, the people who fought on the front lines, the women who labored in the factories to produce the weapons that were used by the soldiers who sacrificed their lives on the battlefield. These are the people that were cherished by the Soviet Union, people who were respected by the Soviet society. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia learned to hate itself. And one of the first things Russia did is turn their backs on these pensioners, because people like Jeffrey Sachs, who won't admit it today, his role, but Jeffrey Sachs went in and helped create a system where the safety net fell out from the Russian people. And so these millions of pensioners were abandoned. And then what happened? Organized crime came in and took advantage of them. It came up with the coroner and the chief of police. And basically, apartments would become abandoned. How were they abandoned? Well, the Russian mob would find out where the pensioner is. The children had long since abandoned them. They were by themselves, and they'd take them out to a hill and they'd shoot them, dump their bodies, and come back in and get the apartment declared to be abandoned. And then they'd get this thing. The other thing that would happen too is that people like Khodorkovsky would go in, because when the Soviet Union collapsed, all this property was state property. So everybody got a voucher because it belonged to the people. And the people all got vouchers that said it's like having shares. But they're starving. They're starving and they can't eat, and there's no health care, there's no nothing, and they need to get something. So then these oligarchs would come in and go, well, we'll buy your shares. Here, we'll give you enough rubles to buy some bread right now. When you're starving and you're looking at a piece of paper and you don't realize that eventually this paper will be worth something. But right now you have a piece of paper and you're starving to death. You say, here's my paper, give me some food. Now, next month, they're still hungry. Now, they no longer have their paper and nobody's taking care of them. So they take them out and they shoot them. All right. This is what the oligarchs did. They are responsible for the murders of millions of Russians. Millions of Russians. They're despicable human beings. But they ran the Russian economy and they couldn't be ignored. So Vladimir Putin had to deal with them. He had to work with them. He had to control them. He had to bring them under control. He had to get them to reinvest. And it was a constant struggle. In fact, the Russians were still stealing billions of dollars or rubles from the Russian economy up until the special military operation, when one of the greatest things the West did was sanction the oligarchs. And Putin went, good. And now you've lost all that money you took out of Russia. Oh, I'm so sorry. You can talk to the Europeans about that. We're not coming to your defense. But if you want to continue to work in Russia now, the rules have changed. You don't take any money out of Russia. Everything gets reinvested back into Russia, and it's all done legally. And so they're starting to clean up the corruption. But the corruption was systemic, and Russia's still working on it. Russia's not perfect today at all, not even close. But they're a hell of a lot better today than they were when Vladimir Putin took over, and they're heading on a great trajectory that will become even greater if this war would stop. But people are betting on the fact that Russia's going to collapse. Russia's not going to collapse. The society is 100% behind the leadership, which is 100% committed to ensuring the safety and stability of Russia going forward. But this requires Europe to stop treating Russia as this resource that can be broken up. It requires the United States to stop viewing Russia as an enemy and start viewing Russia as a force of stability, which the United States is now doing. Europe is opposed to that. But people need to deal with the Russian reality. And the best way to deal with the Russian reality is go to Russia. Go to Russia. It's not hard. I can do it, and my government doesn't want me to do it. You can go to Russia, and once you get into Russia, they will treat you well. They will treat you fairly. They will not be running you through Potemkin villages. They will let you go to almost any place you want to go. You can't go to secret military facilities. Don't try. They will arrest you and put you in jail. But if you want to go to Novosibirsk, go to Novosibirsk. If you want to go to Ekaterinburg, go to Ekaterinburg. If you want to go to Omsk, go to Omsk. If you want to go out to Yakutia, go to Yakutia. Go to Vladivostok. Go to Sakhalin. Go to Kamchatka. Go to Altai. Go see Russia. Meet the Russian people. Listen to the Russian people. Hear what they have to say. See what they have to show you. And you'll know the Russian reality. Don't be a Gilbert Doctorow and hang out with a bunch of 80-year-olds in a cafe somewhere who are going to reminisce about the glories of past times. Don't do that. Go hang out with the real Russian people. Go to the local market, the one where you don't go to the 5-star hotels, although if you have the money, why not? But go to the 3-star hotels. And when you leave the 3-star hotels, walk across the street, go down two blocks, and you'll see the grocery store. And go down in the grocery store and hang out with the people. I did that every night I was in Russia this last time. I just hung out and talked to the shop owner. And I looked at the people coming in. These are people off the streets. These aren't the elites. These aren't the rich people. And I would just have conversations with them. How you doing? How are things going? Hey, want to talk about the price of coffee? Because that was one of Gilbert Doctorow's pet peeves. So I said, hey, let's just talk about coffee, the price of coffee. What have you seen on prices? And they'll have an honest conversation with you. They'll say, oh, we're making more money now, but it's costing more. And that indirectly supports the idea of an overheated, economy that Vladimir Putin's struggling to bring under control right now. But of course it's overheated when you elevate defense industry levels to where they are right now, and you inject money in. You have to acquire talented people. You have to pay them more, so you're injecting a lot more cash into the economy. But there, as Vladimir Putin again said, I wish people would listen to this guy. He says we live in a market economy. It's about supply and demand. We can't manipulate the market because that's actually bad for the market. We can try and bring prices under control by creating stable conditions for the market. But if we come in and start, controlling prices here, we start disrupting the natural flow of the market economy. This is the reality. The market will correct itself. Sometimes it's a painful period of correction, but it will correct itself. This is the reality of Russia. I saw it firsthand. And I would advise people to do it. And you say, well, why? Because if you don't, especially if you're European, you could be dead soon. Because there's idiots in Europe right now talking about attacking Kaliningrad as a way of getting back to the Russians. The Russians will take you off the map.
Vladimir Putin said that Oreshnik is ready to be sent to the battlefield if they want to, if they need it. And in 2 weeks, he's talking about in 2 weeks, they're going to be sent to the battlefield if they want it. But he said about Poseidon and Berwesnik and in the process of getting ready. On the other hand, we've learned from the British media and the British government that they're in the process of making Iron Dome. What is that? Iron Dome. We know what is what has happened to the Iron Dome in Israel and how capable is that? Is that going to be something different, something similar to what they have in Israel? And how capable these sort of air defense systems could be against, for example, Oreshnik?
There's nothing in the world that can shoot down Oreshnik. Nothing. There's nothing can shoot down the Iskander 1000, which is a new modified version of the Iskander that can go 800 miles, 1,000 kilometers. There's nothing can shoot down the Burevestnik. There's nothing can shoot down Sarmat. There's nothing can shoot down. I mean, Poseidon is underwater drone. This is just stupidity and fantasy. If you want to deal with Russian weapons, deal with it through arms control, but that requires a genuine commitment to peace and security. The Russians are not going to negotiate their weapons away at a time when Europe and the United States are talking about the strategic defeat of Russia. So no, it's a pipe dream. Russia has weapons. The whole purpose of developing these weapons was to defeat any existing ballistic missile defense and any future ballistic missile defense. In Iron Dome, there's nothing new about Iron Dome. This is existing technologies, updated accordingly. But you can't. We did this once before. I wish people again would just study their history. Study the history. I wrote a book about it just in case you guys want to go down that path. Scorpion King. Read it. And there's a whole couple chapters to talk about ballistic missile defense and the fallacies that are inherent in this and how trying to defend yourself from ballistic missile attack only creates a arms race that makes ballistic missile defense impossible and prohibitively expensive. Ask yourself why we have multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles, MIRVs, missiles with multiple warheads. Well, because of ballistic missile defense. So if you're going to build a missile to shoot down a missile, why don't I build a missile that has 10 warheads? So now you need 10 interceptors to deal with my one missile. What happens when I put 20 warheads on them? You need 20 interceptors now to do it. You see what I just did there with the math? You can't build enough interceptors. It's impossible. And that's why they came up and they said, well, we need to control this. Why don't we just do away with ballistic missile defense? And that allows us, look what happened, guys. Again, we've done this before. We built the multiple warheaded, the MIRV equipped missile, the ICBMs and such. Once we got rid of ballistic missile defense and START 2, I believe, we demerved. We said, let's start reducing this. And that carried on into New START, where we now have the Minuteman used to have 3 warheads. It has 1. We had the Trident drop down to a classified number between 6 and 8. The Russians did the same thing. We started to reduce the number of warheads. We're headed in the right direction. Now you want to build missile defense as if you forgot what will happen. The first thing is going to happen is they're going to take existing missile platforms and put more warheads on them. And you will never be able to catch up. We will always be able to deploy more warheads than you can build interceptors. That's just the reality of it. So it's stupidity in the extreme. The British are just, barking up the wrong tree. On Oreshnik, he goes into combat service by, I think, December 25th. And the first unit that will be combat ready is the Belarusian regiment, 3 battalions, 3 launchers each. The Belarusians have taken out of mothballs and refurbished a former, I think, SS-20 missile site that's located south of Minsk. They've cleaned it up and put in the right infrastructure, and the missiles are there. There was a major exercise, Zapad, the West exercise, in November, I believe, while I was there, and the Oreshnik was tested. It was operated, taken out, tested. It was still a training. They're training the troops. Just because you have the missile at the base and it can drive around doesn't mean you're combat ready. You have to pass all of your qualifications. You have to be able to do all of the things that make you combat ready. And what they're saying is on December 25th, they'll have passed the final test. They'll be ready to do all the functions necessary, and they'll be ready for war. That's a regiment in Belarus. I would imagine the Russians are simultaneously preparing their own units for subsequent combat readiness. That means that these units already have the equipment. They're just going through the combat checks. the Oreshnik is in serial production. That means it's being built in Vodkinsk. Based upon the maximum output that could be done if the priority was given to it would be they could produce 60 to 80 of these a year. Unlikely they're doing it at that rate right now because there's competing systems and there's a finite amount of production space available to Vodkinsk. There's only so many assembly halls that can that are there, and people trained to do this. Understand, when you build a weapon system like the Oreshnik and you go to serial production, you now have to, Vodkinsk has these colleges, and they have to recruit people. They'll divert a handful from existing work, but they have to recruit new people and train them to the specific technologies that are used in this weapon system. That means advanced welding techniques, inspection techniques, advanced materials. They're using composites, the ceramics. They have to have people that do this. It takes time to train them. So you have a system that's gone through research and development with the Moscow Institute of Thermal Technology, the former Nadoradze Design Bureau, and they're working with an R&D section at Vodkinsk, a handful of people to hand make these Oreshnik missiles that are then used for testing. The missile that was fired in November of last year was a handmade missile. It wasn't a serial production missile. It was a handmade missile. It was the latest variant of it, and it was fired. That was the last operational test. Now the missile has been tested as viable. They can move on to serial production, which they're doing now. But to get to serial production, you not only have to dedicate the production space, but you have to have the people trained to do this. And because of the high quality and control that goes into this, that training doesn't happen overnight. And so what we've seen in the course of a year, Russia has, and just imagine what I'm saying here, people. In the course of a year, Russia went from building a handmade missile to having a missile in combat operation. That required Russia to build up a military industrial production capability from near scratch, train production staff, build all the material necessary for this unit. That's the launchers, the support vehicles, recruit the appropriate personnel, train them, have the doctrine in place that's going to be used, because you just don't have a missile and go, what do we do with it? They have to have a whole doctrine, and the doctrine includes not just its nuclear world, but its non-nuclear role. The doctrine of going up the escalation ladder to avoid nuclear conflict. All this doctrinal concept has to be developed, coordinated with the national leadership, so that it's in the war plans. They did this all in a year, and Seymour Hersh wants to believe that a Pentagon official says the Russian defense ministry is in disarray. I just told you the single most effective functioning thing in the world there. That's the complexity that I just described to you is beyond belief, beyond imagination. And in a year, he went from a handmade missile to serial production, deployed, combat ready, and everything that entails. At the same time, they're fighting a major war in Ukraine. At the same time, they're dealing with an expansive Japan. At the same time, they're dealing with Finland and Sweden, joining NATO and what that does to deployment. The Russian Defense Ministry is the most effective functioning military organization in the world today. That's a reality.
Scott, 4 days ago, there was a meeting in Tehran, among, Russia, China, Iran, Pakistan, and the countries around Afghanistan. They came together to talk about the situation with the foreign troops going to Afghanistan. They're basically talking about the American troops going there. Do you see the possibility of Donald Trump sending American troops back to Afghanistan?
I know that. Let me. I can't say I know, because that implies certainty of knowledge, and I'm not sitting around the table parsing out statements made by Donald Trump. When you look at China and China's development of their ballistic missile fields in Western China, they are out of range of American strike capabilities that exist in the Pacific. So in order to strike them, we'd have to use strategic weapons, which means a full-scale nuclear war. And understand, to strike China, we have to overfly Russian territory. And we overfly Russian territory, Russia assumes we're attacking Russia, so we're going to war against Russia. So how do you offset that? How do you be able to if you're not trying to keep Russia and China together, if you're trying to split them apart, which appears to be some of the goals and objectives here, all this, we're friends with Russia isn't because we suddenly fell in love with Russia. It's sort of like a reimagination of Nixon goes to China to split the Chinese away from the Soviets back in the 1970s. There's an element within the United States, Marco Rubio leading the pack. Guys, really go study Marco Rubio, study who, his former chief of staff, who's now the head of policy planning for the State Department, American Compass, that movement, the links they have with Claremont College, the links they have with Heritage Foundation, and study all the policy papers that they've written about what they want to do with China. China is the enemy. I mean, these guys are fanatic about China. And so the pragmatic approach they've taken with Russia isn't because they've suddenly found a newfound love for Russia and appreciation of Russia. They didn't travel to Russia and go, wow, what a cultured place. They just went, we want to split Russia off from China. So we're going to do that by offering economic incentives to Russia, and because the Russians, of course, are greedy son of a bitches, they're going to go, oh yes, we want all the money in the world from the Americans, the economic possibilities that accrue, and we'll betray the Chinese. They never will. Again, conversations I've had with very well-connected Russians. The strategic relationship between Russia and China is real. It's developed. It's not going away. Reread the 5,000-word joint statement published in February of 2022, on the eve of the special military operation, when Vladimir Putin flew to Beijing and met with Xi Jinping, with President Xi. Reread that. It's a declaration of war against the rules-based international order and American hegemony. You're not going to split the Russians away from Chinese, but that's the goal and objective there. But Trump was told that we used to have strike aircraft at Bagram Air Base. And because the American military always prepares for all contingencies, those strike aircraft had a secondary function that went beyond simply providing close air support for American and Afghan forces. They had a contingency to strike into China. And Trump was briefed on this contingency when he was the president the first time around, and now he becomes president again. And, we don't have American forces in there. He said, we always have to keep Bagram Air Base. Why? Well, now we know why. He wants it back. And so I think you're seeing nations come together to talk about how to prevent this from happening. First of all, it can't happen unless Afghanistan approves of it. The idea that America is going to physically invade Afghanistan again, people need to reread their history. What made the first American engagement in it? Where did the CIA forces come from that went into Afghanistan right after 9/11? Where did the first American Special Forces units deploy from? K2, an airfield in Uzbekistan. But how did you get that in Uzbekistan? How did you supply? Because Russia opened up Russian lines of communication to allow American military supplies, NATO military supplies, to come through Georgian ports, to come through St. Petersburg, that travel down and come into Afghanistan through the former Soviet Central Asian republics. Russia did that. Pakistan allowed the United States to use Pakistan as a logistics transfer point to get into Afghanistan. Today, Pakistan, there's fighting between the Pakistanis and the Afghans. It's not an open border, and Pakistan is not going to let the United States come back in and do that. Russia's not going to facilitate this. So there's no way that the United States can carry out any meaningful military operations in Afghanistan without the full support of the Afghan government, which is going to allow the United States to direct flow material in. But again, we don't have a port facility. This would mean an airlift. I don't see it happening, but I think, again, people hear Trump's rhetoric and they have to act on it by meeting and discussing this possibility.
Yeah. Let me just to wrap up this session, Scott. Here is what Donald Trump said about Venezuela. Yeah, his Venezuela. It seems to me that Venezuela going to be a huge trap for the Trump administration if they go there. Nobody knows what would happen to all these policies that they were talking about before coming to power. And right now, the case of Ukraine is somehow getting to the end. He's making new sort of chaos for himself in with the case of Venezuela.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, he's right because Congress has punted on war powers. He doesn't have to go to Congress. He would have to report to Congress. It says 90 days extendable to 180 days. But 180 days in, what's Congress going to do? Cut off funding to American troops who are engaged in combat. No, Congress needs to abrogate the War Powers Act and make it so that constitutionally the president can't carry out actions of this nature without going to Congress for a declaration of war. But Congress won't do that because that means that Congress then has to assume responsibility for these actions. And these are politicians that Trump said they want to get reelected. They're not in Congress because they're brave, because they're they're courageous because they stand on principles. They're there to get enriched. We know this. We saw a senator, I think it was Johnson, say, if you deny us the ability to do insider trading, if you deny us the ability to break the law, then nobody will run for Congress because there's no incentive. He pretty much said people become members of Congress to become rich. That's it. That's the Congress today. It's a sickness. There's very few members of Congress who actually do things for the benefit of the nation. They all do things for the benefit of the people who got them elected to make them money and to make themselves money. How do you explain people making $54,000 when they run for Congress 2 years later being multimillionaires? How did that happen? Because they have insider trading. They're able to leverage the knowledge they have from running the country into accumulating wealth. So Trump is 100% correct. He doesn't need to go to Congress at all. And Congress doesn't have the, cojones to impeach him for thumbing the nose at because it's fundamentally split. Will he act on this? I know Marco Rubio is desperate Rubio wants to use Venezuela as his stepping stone to the White House. Rubio believes that
he's so popular in Latin America. Marco Rubio.
No, he's not popular. He's not popular anywhere.
I'm joking.
Yeah, he's not popular anywhere, not even in the United States. No. But he's fooled himself into believing that he's some sort of great crusader of American democracy and all this such. So he's trying to do this war. Pete Hegseth is desperate to, for a war to look tough on. But the problem is when they run the numbers, they lose. I mean, we're losing every war game in Venezuela right now, every one, because we don't have the solution. The only solution they have right now is the CIA's long game. And again, the CIA has shown historically that it can remove governments from power. Not with 100% certainty. They certainly tried to remove the Iranian government from power, and that didn't work. But with Venezuela, given the proximity to the United States and the isolation that it has in the world today because of this proximity, we can probably get rid of Maduro, and we probably will get rid of Maduro. The question now, though, is can we get rid of Maduro in a way that empowers a political opposition that can take control and avoid civil war? Or by getting rid of Maduro, do we unleash a disaster, a repeat of Libya, a repeat of Iraq, where nation states fall apart, civil war, and because Venezuela, has such a large amount of oil, the disruption that will have on the global energy economy. So I think that the reality of the consequences of not being able to guarantee victory is holding Trump back. I still believe that he's smart enough to know that if he gets us involved in a South American quagmire on the eve of midterm elections, that he's finished, that his presidency is over. But he's now committed because of Marco Rubio, Rubio has gotten him embroiled in this. And so I think you're going to be seeing a longer game of seeking to economically weaken Venezuela, creating opposition that can be exploited effectively by the CIA, et cetera. And, the goal is to avoid a quagmire from developing before midterm elections. After midterm elections, if Trump wins, all bets are off. I mean, we'll be bombing the hell out of Venezuela. But Trump's has a problem right now, a huge problem. He gave a pathetic performance the other night when he was talking about his economic plan. It wasn't convincing, and the American economy is not doing well. He can send out $1,776 to every American serviceman all he wants. At the end of the day, that's only 1.2 million votes. Nation of 350 plus million, many of whom now are just recognizing that this man's a disaster, that he hasn't delivered on anything, that he's a frontal assault on American civil liberties. I guess there's enough people that are still happy about the border security, and the fact that he shut down the border. But again, bombing Venezuela, we're just going to be sending millions of more people heading north, putting stresses. So Venezuela is a tough one because, he wants to attack Venezuela. And Marco Rubio wants to attack Venezuela. And Pete Hegseth wants to attack Venezuela. But there are some people who are politically smart who say, if you do this and we don't win decisively, that's the end of you. That's it. You're finished. And, Mr. President, what he has to understand is that he doesn't just have to survive to the end of his term. He needs a sympathetic politician to be president in 2028. Because here is the guarantee of guarantees. If the Democrats take control of the presidency in 2028, Donald Trump's going to jail. Because he's a criminal. He's broken laws like you wouldn't believe. And the Democrats will find a way to punish him. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says, because Donald Trump's quickly making the Supreme Court a non-player by ignoring the rulings. Donald Trump will go to jail. He'll die in prison. So he can't afford to lose not just midterms, but he has to make sure that somebody loyal to him is going to be president in 2028. And I think he's starting to wake up to the fact that this is slipping away, and that he has to be careful. And I think Venezuela is one of those things that he has to be very careful about.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Well, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. And Merry Christmas. I forgot.
Oh, yeah, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. And
Happy New Year.
safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you.